For much of America, the disaster that struck the Gulf Coast 1 year ago might be a fading memory, but not for Terry Smithson, Intel education strategist and founding manager of the Hurricane Education Leadership Project, HELP, a consortium of more than 30 edtech providers, associations, and foundations. The HELP team understands all too well the daunting mountain of work that still needs to be done and the young lives at stake in the states and communities ravaged last year by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. During a 2-day HELP education conference in New Orleans on the eve of Katrina's first anniversary, Terry Smithson sat down with eSchool News TV to talk about HELP and what it's trying to accomplish for educators and students in the wake of the worst natural disaster in U.S. history.
How did HELP form as an idea, and then what were the beginning phases of HELP? So
almost immediately after the hurricane, we started noticing that funds that were being donated by corporations and a lot of the partners were either not landing where they need to land, equipment being donated, books being donated, supplies being donated were sitting in trucks or never reached the destinations they were intended for, which is really to help the students. So we saw the opportunity to pull together under one umbrella all of the companies doing these efforts, as well as bring even more brain power and include companies that hadn't been able to at the time, but bring all these companies together to say, let's really make one concentrated effort because we'll get a lot further. And it also really came from realizing that these children lost not only their environment, but in a lot of cases everything, and being able to provide them the opportunity to move to a 21st century learning format, which they were not in. Mm-hmm. And it's really where we wanted these kids to go to make them the most competitive they could be.
And what states are you mainly focusing on at this point?
So we're really looking as the HELP team, which is Hurricane Education Leadership Program. We're really looking at the 5 Gulf states that are normally affected by hurricanes in the U.S., which would be Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And all 5 states are partners with us from the state level.
Mm-hmm. And then after the germination of the idea, I guess the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first actual organizing meeting was in Atlanta. Yes. And that was around what, December?
December 13th. We brought in all of the companies. We invited them to an information session to explain the concept of what we wanted to do with the team. And the team actually started working then, coming up with ideas like saying, well, if we're going to work as a team, here's the groundwork, how we need to work, but also here's the committees and things that we feel are necessary. So for an example, an advocacy committee, and we have some of the most well-connected folks in Washington, D.C. on this committee from our companies and from the national nonprofit organizations, and have them say, you know, when they need help, if funds are coming down and they need more funds, these guys have the ability to go to the senators and congressmen and really figure out how to apply help from there. So the 9 committees are all intricate in making sure that this whole team moves forward.
And you have co-chairs of each of these committees, is that true?
Yes, so it's a very unique situation because nowhere have we found where for-profit companies work with national nonprofit organizations within the same environment to accomplish something. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we have not only the for-profit companies, we have the nonprofits, we have, of course, the education press, we've got foundations that have come to the table, and again, foundations are like nonprofits. They're very cautious about how they work in that environment. And because of that, the team felt it was necessary to have co-chairs of each committee, a for-profit and a nonprofit, and that created a check and balance. So those 18 co-chairs form an advisory panel to the Executive Oversight Committee made up of 5 people that's a representative of all the segments.
And all this organization and the membership and everything is spelled out on your website, correct?
Yes, it is, at www.educationhelpteam.org.
Okay. So after that December meeting, there were, what was the next step after that?
Well, we decided it was vital to bring a cross-section of the team down and actually give them a tour and show them firsthand, because really photos don't capture. I mean, we've all seen on TV, we've all seen Anderson Cooper countless times here with CNN. We've seen a lot of news, fresh news on the items saying, you know, look at this, but you really don't see it until you get the panoramic view personally by being there. So we brought a cross-section of 40 individuals down representing the team, And we started in Baton Rouge. We met with the mayor, and the purpose for doing that was to identify ways to help the displaced students, because obviously a lot of them moved to the Baton Rouge area. We met with the mayor and his staff, and then some of the school districts there. Then we came down to New Orleans, met with the mayor's office here, the Bring New Orleans Back committee. Then we actually took them on a tour of Plaquemines Parish, which of course lost 6 of their 9 schools, and the eye of the hurricane actually went right over Plaquemines.
And you also met with the consulting group that was advising New Orleans on how to restore what they'd had previous to the hurricane.
Yes.
And you had an interesting experience with working with those folks in terms of what their understanding of technology and education was.
Yes, that was Boston Consulting Group, and we were able to provide some guidance to them as well on what does a 21st century learning environment look like. I mean, you know, they knew what they thought was the best environment, but they were very willing and open, as well as all the New Orleans recovery school districts and the charter schools were very willing to look at the guidance our team was providing. And it's probably, when I talk about guidance, good to mention what the real mission of the team is, and that is there's really 4 areas we're looking at. One is the schools that were completely destroyed, lost all infrastructure, and you know, it's a horrible thing, but it also creates a unique opportunity. It creates the opportunity for, if a school is rebuilt correctly, for them to leap ahead into the 21st century learning environment. And that means, of course, that they have to replace their infrastructure anyway. They have to replace, you know, whatever technology they had in the school. Why not spend the money as wisely as you can and create the new environment that's the most beneficial for teaching methods of today? So those schools, that's one. The second piece is really for the wind and water damaged schools. They likely do have some infrastructure in place, so they can't afford just to go in and say, trash it all, let's rebuild. So what's happening there is we're giving them guidance on how to move as far down that road as they can. Then the third element is the displaced students that landed all over the United States. And, you know, of course, thank you to all of the states who opened their arms and took these students in, and the school districts. But it's a burden. And when somebody comes into a school, it's an additional added burden. So how do we help those displaced students? How do we help those schools that accepted those displaced students? And then the fourth element was really, we couldn't find a model like this anywhere for education recovery after disaster. And bringing this team together creates a mobilized team that can mobilize quickly. They can address whatever education issues are happening and how to overcome some of the hurdles that these people faced. And we're very pleased, too, by the way, to announce that we've just added a new element to the team called the Education Recovery team, I guess. And they'll be made up of 10 people from the 5 states, 2 from each of the states, that are willing to hop on a plane when a disaster happens and actually go to the area and sit down with educators and say, look, we lived through this. Here's the things you should be doing, and provide them that kind of guidance, which is invaluable, because here they had none of that. They just had to figure it out on their own.